Coming up, whose name is on a Club World Cup ball?
Is Russia set for a sporting return?
And what has Nasser Al-Khelaifi been recorded saying?
Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked. If you hit subscribe or follow wherever you're listening to us, we land in your pod feeds automatically to listen to Martyn Ziegler from The Times, Tariq Panja from The New York Times, myself, Rob Harris from Sky News. And we'll be joined in a few moments by Moya Dodd because we're starting by reflecting on the court ruling in Madrid that says a sexual assault was committed on the pitch after the Women's World Cup final in 2023. This is Luis Rubiales, the former Spanish Federation president, being found guilty of sexually assaulting Jenni Hermoso with that non-consensual kiss as she went up to collect her World Cup winner's medal. Now, there is a lot of scrutiny over this verdict because Rubiales was spared jail and fined just over €10,000 instead, and he was acquitted of coercing Hermoso into defending him. Despite some concerns about the leniency of the sentence, it is being seen as a significant ruling in Spain, holding someone so powerful to account, not just in football, but in Spanish society.
And just a day later, the Court of Arbitration for Sport upheld FIFA's 3-year ban against Rubiales for his actions there. So if there's any positives to take from this, it is that this guy has been sanctioned and found guilty, and it has led to a very important conversation to take place.
I think this is a very important case, not just for football, but for sport more widely. This is a man who was one of the most important people in football, just president of the Spanish FA. He was a UEFA vice president. He was heading up Spain's bid to host the 2030 World Cup. So really, really influential.
Well, we can now bring you the thoughts of former Australia vice-captain Moya Dodd, who also previously sat on FIFA's executive committee. I saw her out in Australia at the Women's World Cup in 2023. And Moya, previously on this pod, has sent us this voice note from Sydney.
I feel like the conviction of Luis Rubiales was a long time coming. It feels like he was the full stop at the end of a very long sentence. There have been compounding events over many years in the Spanish women's national team. Of course, there were the 15 who wrote a letter of withdrawal before the World Cup. But before that, there was a letter from the 2015 team, the first team to qualify for a Women's World Cup. And they were begging for a new coach after having had the same guy for 27 years. And there were players like the captain at that time, Vero Bequete, who never played for her country again after signing that letter. So there's a long history of mismanagement and oppression of those players. And I think it was crucial that the power and privilege and impunity, which culminated at the World Cup final, was called to account by the court. I would hope that this case serves as a reminder to those who run national teams and federations, to those in positions of power and privilege, that even though you run a sport, you are still subject to the rule of law. You're subject to labour law, to competition law, and indeed to criminal law, and you're not exempted from the standards that apply to everybody else in society.
Thanks to Moya for sending her thoughts. Luis Rubiales is someone we encountered very often around UEFA and FIFA events. It really has been quite a downfall.
It sends a message. In the past, people might have felt like they were in a position where they were untouchable. That is not going to be the case anymore. And as a result of this case, I think it is showing to the world that actually things may have changed in terms of where people in football may once have thought they could get away with anything. Now, perhaps the boundaries have changed.
Although the verdict hasn't been acknowledged publicly or commented on publicly by any of those running football, not on the very active social media accounts linked to the leadership of world football. And that's despite the fact a sexual assault took place with the world watching after one of FIFA's biggest events, a World Cup final, during the victory ceremony. Yes, FIFA did suspend Rubiales in the days after the final. In fact, they put significant pressure on him when others weren't necessarily speaking out. They eventually did ban him for 3 years as well. But FIFA said they couldn't comment on the case this week because they're waiting for the CAS ruling. Well, that came within a day of the Madrid verdict, holding Rubiales' 3-year ban from world football. Perhaps this was the moment to acknowledge Jenni Hermoso's bravery in pursuing the prosecution, to acknowledge the fact she went through a sexual assault, acknowledging the severity of the incident, and perhaps sending out a wider message about reporting sexual misconduct in football, whether on a pitch or indeed training anywhere around the world. We will see generic campaign commitments at time, but these are the moments when the world is really watching and looking for the leadership. Above all, it's the ordeal that Jenni Hermoso has had to go through, this sexual assault tainting, as she said it, what should have been one of the greatest days of her life.
You know, in not just Spanish football circles or in football circles generally, but across the world about issues like this. It's told people, no, it's not okay to behave like this. What a insane period that was. Not only the forced kiss on Jennifer Hermoso, but also all the efforts to get her to sign a statement saying it was consensual, doubling down at that strange conference where he gave Jorge Vilda, the then coach, a new contract. Can't help thinking that what happened in the aftermath and how the Spanish FA and Rubiales dealt with it, how they allowed Rubiales to deal with it, made this situation, which was already terrible, a lot worse.
This might not be the end of the legal process, though. Luis Rubiales has launched an appeal against his conviction, and Jenni Hermoso has launched her own appeal as well. Prosecutors were seeking a 2.5-year jail sentence, so it is being seen that Rubiales got off lightly with this fine that equates to just over 10. But while the judge did convict Rubiales of sexual assault, he did find that it was of a lesser intensity without violence and intimidation in terms of the coercion, which is why Rubiales was acquitted of coercion and indeed not having to serve any jail time. We heard from Irina Paredes during the trial, one of Jenni Hermoso's teammates. She's captaining the Spain team at the moment. She spoke in the hours after the verdict because Spain were playing the next day. And she said that while I think the conviction for sexual assault is correct, what I find somehow striking and strange is that there was no conviction for coercion. So we'll wait to see if that is something examined again. But still, we have some people trying to dismiss this as just a kiss, really undermining Hermoso. And she said during her trial that while she might have been outwardly smiling in some of those celebrations, she was crying inside. She was having to sort of go through the motions of celebrations, and it wasn't just a kiss.
You could see the reactions in social media where you're going to have this being one of those wedge issues, which it really shouldn't be, where people have leapt to the defence of Rubiales, certainly in the aftermath, people who should know better.
Now, some news of something new from FIFA. They're opening up information to the world. There's a new website that will tell you if a player has switched which country they want to play for.
There's a website just telling you that.
I'm going to claim some credit because quite a few years ago I was pushing FIFA to release this information. They were resisting. Then they started to send to myself and a colleague, Graham at the time, when we were at AP. And maybe the media aren't always wrong because they figured it needs its own website.
So this is when a player born in, say, I don't know, England decides to play for China or one of these countries that might want to recruit players.
Yes, or someone has, legitimately decided that they might wish to represent another country. It's a point I've raised in the past that if a player was frozen out by a national team manager, why should they be sent into international exile? If they could qualify for another country, maybe it should be easier for them to play for a different nation. And in this world where you're moving around more, you've got more national identities as well.
What's the website address for interested listeners?
knowledge.fifa.com.
And the knowledge you might require here is what it takes 5 years or so, right, for a player to... You can't change suddenly after a week. And if you've played for a national team in a competitive game, you cannot change country.
Now, it's interesting, it's called knowledge in this world where we have artificial intelligence, and that might be helping us out in a few minutes because like so much of the global news agenda, it's hard to stay away from Donald Trump and his pronouncements, changing the direction of the conversation. Where was he this week?
He was in Miami, which is useful because he's got that lovely home near there, his winter palace. Mar-a-Lago. He was at the F2 summit, which is a Saudi Arabian government-backed Investment Summit in Miami.
And who was there on the front row? Let Donald Trump explain.
We have the most important person, at least until the World Cup is over, is here. Johnny, stand up. He gave the United States the World Cup. Johnny, thank you very much. I didn't know you were here. That's very good. He's the king of soccer. That's not bad.
Trump did name check Gianni Infantino several times, but also doubled down on his criticism of Zelensky in Ukraine, saying that Ukraine shouldn't have started the war, that he's governing the country terribly, he's unelected, which is all complete nonsense. So I thought it was slightly surprising that actually afterwards that Infantino put out a statement on Instagram saying, "Congratulations, President Donald Trump, for your speech, which puts peace and unity in the centre of everything."
Peace on Russia's terms, and it's more of the same, isn't it? Gianni Infantino bending over backwards to praise Donald Trump. And there was an announcement on the stage there by, I'm not sure who the guy was, the MC, to say there was a special gift waiting for Donald Trump backstage from Gianni Infantino, a Club World Cup ball embossed with Trump's name. And that had to be announced to all the attendees as well.
Mr. President, backstage you have a gift from Gianni. He gave us the first ball with your name, which will be played for the World Cup
That's great.
in America.
It's going to be great. Thank you, Johnny, very much.
Don't the rules of football talk about no political messages on equipment? Surely having the name of the US president, a head of state, is a political message?
It's not actually going to be on the ball used in the tournament. I think it was just a gift.
Yes.
I think that really would be going a step too far.
It's not quite like having president of FIFA's name on the ball.
On the trophy or something
The
like
trophy. This conference was organised by the Saudi Public Investment Fund, I think, owners of Newcastle United and Live Golf, and this sort of connection, the whole sort of FIFA, Saudi, Trump sport. It seemed to go round and round.
And later in the week, when Donald Trump was back at the White House, he was meeting with Tiger Woods, the PGA Commissioner Jay Monahan, and the Live Golf Chief Executive Yasser Al-Rumayyan, well known, of course, as Governor of the Public Investment Fund and Chairman of Newcastle United, all in an attempt to reunify golf, and the PGA delegation thanking the leadership of Donald Trump, this Saudi sport and political nexus. And we've seen it in broadcasting too. DAZN got a bit of a financial boost from the Public Investment Fund. Quite coincidental, just months after DAZN paid the $1 billion for the Club World Cup rights that seemingly didn't attract much interest from other broadcasters around the world.
This is the deal that we've been talking about for months, finally being consummated, about $1 billion. Well, what's also strange, it's all very strange, but they're saying it's for about 10% of the company, which would value DAZN at $10 billion. This is DAZN that's lost $6.5 billion in the last 5 years. And that billion is, as you say, the equivalent amount as DAZN had paid to a desperate FIFA for the Club World Cup rights just before Saudi Arabia got the World Cup. But everyone, of course, is insisting none of this is connected. It's all coincidental.
Has there actually been a statement denying it?
There have been, I guess, informed briefings, if you like, and we've talked about this. Is that good enough? Probably not. It's hard to think they're not connected, isn't it? If you were rational, and if we go back, the fact is FIFA was really struggling to sell the Club World Cup media rights, not getting offered more than $500 million at best, and suddenly DAZN pops up with $1 billion check for this competition. And then the sequence, as we had predicted, with DAZN being the subject of investment from Saudi Arabia, and of course Saudi Arabia getting the 2034 World Cup. These are just pieces of a chessboard. But until there is any direct proof, you can't say it's all connected, can you?
I mean, at the time of announcing the deal with FIFA, DAZN did say it did not depend on any future investment. So I suppose that's a denial.
So we should all move on. Can seem perhaps, well, particularly inside FIFA HQ, there are many HQs, they think we're just going on every week about this. Why are we singling out the Trump-Infantino relationship? They are together very often. How does this fit in with the football unites the world, making football truly global, messaging, complaining about the dominance of European finance. Would we expect to see Infantino travelling the world more? Something, though, Tariq, you do complain about, but to be visiting lots of member associations, even, say, Brazil, which is hosting the next Women's World Cup, rather than being constantly in the United States. While, of course, many sports leaders would crave that very close relationship with the head of state of a country about to host their biggest event to be able to get things done.
Yeah, it's not visit the world. It's about gratuitous travel with powerful people for photo opportunities. Whether how much any of this has got to do with football, that was the point in terms of the rest of the travel. The issue here with Trump is that he's a very, very clearly a very divisive figure. In the first 3 weeks, we've had this guy threatening anyone and everyone with a tariff if they don't agree with him, including the two partners for the US in the 2026 World Cup, Mexico and Canada. Squarely aligning yourself with any leader, particularly at this time, particularly this guy, while he is picking fights all over the world, might not be the best course of action for someone who is the leader of a global governing body like FIFA is.
Interestingly, one of Gianni Infantino's big messages has been at how much football is distributing their own aid from FIFA around the world through the FIFA Forward program, helping countries develop. The messaging is very different from Donald Trump about cutting USAID around the world, although that would be seen as to invest more of that money in the United States. Slightly awkward for Gianni Infantino, who's sort of smirking, maybe sitting slightly uneasily as Donald Trump was listing the various programs being cut around the world. Some of them completely invented, like the condoms for Hamas program, which is a falsehood. It's actually a condoms for Gaza, but not the Gaza in the Middle East, but Gaza in Mozambique. But that's being conflated as a sort of attack message. And Gianni Infantino is sitting there as one of the Trump delegation alongside Elon Musk as well.
And Jared Kushner, who he was sat right next to, Trump's son-in-law, who has benefited from a $2 billion investment from Saudi Arabia. In fact, there was a piece on CBS, American broadcast yesterday, saying Trump's speech at this Saudi-backed event highlights questions over the business ties and conflicts of interest. We've talked about the Live Golf thing in the past, and this is Infantino, kind of the sports figure, dragged into all of this. You just think, don't you want a bit of distance, mate?
But while we're giving our own commentary, maybe there's someone better to offer an opinion. Perhaps Elon Musk himself, or the technology he's been promoting all week. It's the updated new version of Grok, his answer to ChatGPT. So you've got to think this is something that Elon Musk is fully behind and backs his technology. So I'll put a question into it. Let's not hear what we all have to say. Is there any issue with Gianni Infantino's close relationship with Donald Trump and Elon Musk? So I've sent you around the answer. Does anything stand out there for you? I mean, just looking around, it talks about how there could be issues with FIFA as positioning itself as an apolitical body and focusing on football uniting the world, as Infantino often says. Maybe Grok's learning from our pods, that it says that his enthusiastic alignment with Trump, a polarizing figure known for controversial policies, and Musk, who's been vocal about far-right views and misinformation on X, could undermine that stance, the FIFA stance.
Yeah, it goes on. For instance, Infantino's adoption of Trump's Make America Great Again slogan in his post has drawn criticism for echoing partisan rhetoric, which some see as inappropriate for the head of a global organization.
There you go. The Grok has spoken.
And then it references evening the Trump policies on threatening tariffs and how Infantino's avoid critiquing him, instead amplifying their bromance, as Grok puts it.
Who are we to question the Grok? I mean, these are the points that have been raised, I guess, here and elsewhere over the past few months. But it's so odd, isn't it? What's next week going to bring? We are week to week at the moment with this stuff, aren't we?
Yeah, and it talks about the perception rather than proven impropriety and just skepticism about this relationship, how the optics are an issue, and it even talks about the hobnobbing as well with Musk's brother Kimball. This is sort of stuff we've been talking about. I mean, Grok is listening to Sport on Lot.
Clearly. One issue actually for the US, and which could any cuts that are brought in, I mean, Elon Musk is making huge cuts everywhere in US federal spending, is about the air travel system for the World Cup and the Olympics. Because there's a report come out from the US Travel Association, written by a group of former government officials, industry experts, saying that the system is ill-equipped for those events. That's probably quite concerning.
And if this was a World Cup in South Africa or Brazil, for instance, and we've talked about perhaps double standards even in media coverage, this might have more of a focus, and perhaps there's a bit of a blind spot for American issues relating to the World Cup, whereas this might be headline news if it was South Africa or Brazil have air network turmoil ahead of the World Cup. How are fans going to be impacted? And particularly for a World Cup where it's going to be reliant on planes to move around in North America.
Yeah, developing world countries get a lot more focus on their infrastructure issues than the developed world. That's true. And is that fair? Probably not. But yeah, this report is out. The other thing it had in there, as well as the obvious infrastructure issues, is the delay in visa processing. Now, there are countries out there, I think Ghana is one of those, I think maybe Colombia as well, where the average waiting time now for a visa is longer than the gap until the World Cup in the US. This is an issue that needs to be addressed. FIFA, I think, would acknowledge it as well, but there is little clarity on this. It's all well and good, us, we're here in the UK talking about it. People like us are going to be fine because you can get whatever you need very quickly. But
not after listening to some of your comments maybe on here.
maybe not me, but a lot of the world you do sense they might struggle to get there, and I hope it's a story that people will be talking about and raising it with FIFA, because as you said, or as he says, FIFA unites the world. It's the World's Cup, and the hosting country should make it possible for fans of all teams to travel there.
And maybe we will see Russian fans travelling to the World Cup. We're counting down to qualifying beginning in Europe for the 2026 World Cup. It begins in March for some of the groups. Maybe that's too soon for Russia, but do we think everything is starting to align with Russia's return from sporting exile?
Well, I mean, it's got to be a question what's going to happen if Trump forces through this peace deal and the war ends in Ukraine. I guess international sports organizations will respond with alacrity to get Russia back into the fold, because the Russian sports officials are still involved, aren't they? FIFA, UEFA, the IOC. They just basically prevented from taking part in competition, mostly because other countries refuse to play them. That's been the main reason.
That's the main point, though, isn't it? So Russia is not really banned. Russia is banned in a sense, as you just said there. That the only reason is this force majeure, certainly when it comes to football, is countries across Europe have refused to play. Clubs have refused to play against Russian opposition. And national teams, several of them, refused to play against the Russian national team. Now, raises the point, if Trump mastermind some sort of peace deal that Europe doesn't agree with, how does that change anything in terms of European countries and European clubs wanting to play football against Russian teams?
Well, this seems to play into the wider discussion about how the situation develops, whether Europe splits diplomatically from the United States, which would be really notable, and it rejects any peace deal that the US and Russia attempt to force on Ukraine, and diplomatically whether the likes of Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer decide that they're going to back Ukraine anyway. So how would that have ramifications for football? Would UEFA still try to insist, well, maybe through its members at the very least, that Russia remains banned in terms of a football entity from playing? But it's really a microcosm of the bigger issue at play here, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's also, let's not forget, a lot of sports organisations already allow Russians to play, certainly individually, don't they? Tennis,
just in the last week, the Russia Football Union has announced they've got friendly matches against Zambia and Nigeria. So even when we see this week headlines about the world condemning Trump for the dictator comments about Zelensky, the entire world isn't necessarily caring about this war, isn't completely invested in it in terms of Ukraine's victory, and seems very distant from it. So there's not a complete global consensus on this.
That's true, but from a practical point of view, do we anticipate seeing Aston Villa playing away at Lokomotiv Moscow anytime soon, week after a peace deal is signed, or a German team, Bayern Munich, off to Zenit St. Petersburg very, very shortly after. Is a lot of this, whatever the noise is very unclear. You can't just say they're back in the fold if you have no opposition to play. So I think in terms of what we're talking about here, about matches being played in big football competitions, for example, we'll have to see what the European response is.
But if European leaders grudgingly accept whatever compromise deal is announced, well, their football associations will probably then go along with it as well. Perhaps teams won't play in Russia on security and safety grounds still, but on neutral territory.
If the home nations of those clubs have, as you say, grudgingly accepted that there is now peace and there's going to be integration, of course, the world moves on. And to be honest, everyone wants peace, don't they? No one wants like a war with Russia. I think people would obviously want peace. It just depends on what terms, with you kind of the casualty in the middle of all this.
So that's something that could very quickly develop in the coming weeks. Not quite like a situation in the Asian Champions League, the men's competition, where Chinese club just suddenly withdrew from playing its final group stage game this week.
Yeah, Shandong Taishan, just hours before it was meant to play its match against Ulsan in South Korea, pulled out. Now, there's been a sort of continuous decline in, I think is probably the apt word, in Chinese elite football. Lots of financial problems, and once a country was putting millions, if not billions, into football, that the plug has been well and truly pulled. And this looks like another reflection of what's happening in the country's football.
The club did cite serious health issues preventing that game against the South Korean club Ulsan HD from going ahead.
Shandong Taishan, also known as the Blackburn Rovers of China. Do you remember? Another team that pulled out of a crucial match because citing illnesses.
Is this going to be some Middlesbrough?
Blackburn v Middlesbrough. Yes.
Mid-90s something?
Amazing.
By the way, is Middlesbrough pulled out against Blackburn?
No, I think it was Blackburn.
No, it's Middlesbrough. They got a points deduction.
Oh, there you are, look.
Yeah.
The veteran has spoken. What's news, veteran?
Officially a veteran. I was described as a veteran in the Leeds University Alumni magazine this month. I was a bit harsh.
Veteran or stalwart?
Still would be better.
Well, a stalwart of many sporting bodies and companies we mention quite often. Nasser Al-Khelaifi, beIN, European Club Association, and Paris Saint-Germain, paddle as well. Interestingly, paddle has started showing their premier paddle events on Cristiano Ronaldo's YouTube channel this week. But it's a recording perhaps Nasser Al-Khelaifi didn't want that's been making headlines in France.
This is remarkable. It's a Zoom call, so there's video footage and audio of this. This happened in the summer. The French league in meltdown again over its TV deal, where it ended up going to DAZN and beIN, which is, as you mentioned, presided over by Nasser Al-Khelaifi. Anyway, it's a very heated debate among club owners, and on one side is John Textor, the Lyon owner, and also Joseph Orgulian, one of the owners of Lens. But the language and the tone, it's so bitter. And in one bit, you have Nasser Al-Khelaifi telling John Textor the following: "John, shut up. You don't understand anything. You're a cowboy who came from nowhere and comes to talk to us." And I've not heard anything like that before. And Nasser Al-Khelaifi is then called a bully and a tyrant by John Textor. It's just remarkable. And what's the status of all of these French TV deals? What do you make of this chat?
I think it's incredible. Just in terms of the order, did Textor call Nasser Al-Khelaifi a bully and a tyrant first, and then he responded to calling him a cowboy, or the other way around?
Yes. So the way it goes is Jean-Pierre Caillot, the president of Hans, interrupted Textor when he was talking about Lyon's business structure, saying, "Honestly, we're short on time." Textor then complained that the other leaders besides Nasser Al-Khelaifi should be allowed to speak. And he says, "Nasser, you're a tyrant." And then Nasser Al-Khelaifi explodes with the cowboy who came from nowhere complaint. He says, "I'm leaving this call because he's really going to make me angry. I swear, I'm wasting my time. I'm leaving the meeting. He doesn't understand anything, I swear. And then just goes on. And then the Lance president says, Nasser, I think you should respect the other presidents. And then Nasser responds to him and says, you're intelligent and you're a businessman, but you don't understand anything about the media, Al-Khelaifi said to Orgulian.
It's quite an insight, and the sense we often get from FIFA, UEFA meetings is there's no proper debate, discussion or disagreements. Everyone just perhaps compliantly goes along with the consensus view. So at least they're using that meeting to air their differences of opinions.
Well, I think you're right about the UEFA and FIFA meetings. There's very few disagreements. The ones that have blown up, we've talked about over Alexander Shefferin's term limits, for example, and David Gill some months ago. That one blew up, but very rarely do they. What is this? This was over the French TV deal. This was in the summer about a French TV contract. What was going on there and what's happened?
Yeah, this is the Ligue 1, the French League One, struggling basically to get a TV deal of any sort of size that it said the clubs thought was enough in order to sort of, provide the income that they need. And there was a sort of a dispute. I think John Textor, if memory serves, was keen that they should have their own sort of direct-to-consumer product. Other clubs, including Nasser Al-Khelaifi of PSG, disagreed. Obviously got very heated. I don't think even in the Premier League in England, when there are huge disagreements, as there are, as we talk about quite regularly, things don't get sort of personal like that. I think it's quite interesting.
It's mad, isn't it?
It is mad.
It's crazy.
You never have people calling each other a tyrant and a cowboy in the Premier League meetings.
No, you might think it, but you won't say it.
Exactly. Exactly.
And since then, so that was in the summer, DAZN has got the French deal with beIN getting, I think, one game a week. DAZN's deal was about 400 to 500 million, beIN's at 100. Now it looks like DAZN want to pull out, right?
Yeah, we said, I think in our last podcast, that there's a sort of the French League have issued sort of legal proceedings demanding that they make a payment. So it all looks like it's yet again, there's not for the first time with the French League, it's all going downhill. And yes, watch this space.
Yeah, just a couple of years ago, of course, it lost a €1 billion contract within a few weeks from Media Pro and sort of entered a crisis spiral, which it still hasn't got out of. This DAZN deal was worth half of that, and even then, they can't make the numbers work. So we're going to have to stop talking about the big 5 leagues soon in Europe, because certainly in terms of revenue, the French league is in an absolute state.
Amazon is going to be offering pay-per-view for subscribers in the UK to watch French League One matches from this weekend. So I think £2.49 you can watch Brest play Lyon or Lens or whoever.
Do you think Amazon will get more than £2.49 in total for those rights?
Well, it's been quite football heavy throughout this week, and we're still dealing with the fallout from the Yannick Sinne verdict. Just a 3-month ban in that doping case, and it's been interesting hearing from many different sides. Novak Djokovic has been talking about whether favouritism was shown. I've been speaking to the World Anti-Doping Agency, who insist actually they never wanted a minimum 1-year ban anyway, and they're happy with 3 months. That, as some see it, conveniently falls right between the gap between the first Grand Slams of the year, so it's back in time for the French Open. What have we made of the fallout? I mean, what struck me is the fact perhaps in tennis players are more willing to voice their opinions than in some other sports.
Yeah, Novak Djokovic, I think he was very plain spoken. He basically suggested that players who had less well known, less famous, were treated much more harshly than Sinne has been. But interesting that the WADA was saying that, because it was sort of generally assumed that they'd appealed against it and they were pushing for this 1-year ban. But the fact that they are now saying that they are happy with it sort of raises some slight question marks, maybe.
Tariq, you're always very supportive of WADA positions and their stances.
Yes. And now, you have to look at this in the timing and the context. WADA, when they appealed, were under a huge amount of pressure over whether they take their job as seriously as they should and whether they take on big nations or big athletes. This is in the wake of the Chinese doping scandal that brought a lot of attention to WADA. And suddenly this Sinne case appeared at the time, and WADA then appealed it. Far be it from me to say this feels like a public relations kind of exercise here, but WADA has looked serious by appealing. And also, Sinne, if you look at some of the detractors when it comes to the punishment, think he's got away with it and it's very convenient. You know, you look at the two things together and say, you know, it creates this sense of a two-tiered system again, doesn't it? Because he's back and playing. So has it been an own goal for WADA? Because had they not done anything, would people have been would this outcry return for a second time?
It all focuses on strict liability and how much he was just purely a victim of contamination, as all sides now seem to accept from that massage, and saying he did ask the physio if he was treating the cut in any way. He was assured not with any banned substance, and then he removed the bandage and he had used a spray, and that spray then contaminated Sinne. But I suppose the question is, if you didn't have the legal resource of Sinne, would other athletes had served a much longer ban?
Yeah, this word resource you've just used is really interesting as well. I think the other part of this is, look, these tennis players, Sinne, $9.4 million in prize money. Football teams generate huge amounts of money. I think there's a case here where you're scared of getting sued as well. If you punish someone too harshly, if they take you to court, you've got an issue there because they're worth millions of dollars, aren't they, nowadays? It just feels that might be part of the equation too.
As we focused so heavily on Manchester City, if you've not heard last week's pod, a discussion there of their legal victory over the Premier League and where that heads to next. Well, that about brings an end to this week's episode with a bit of assistance from Elon Musk and Grok.
Yeah, Grok, if you want to send your email in or any comments, Rob, where should Grok be sending her comments?
sportunlockpod@gmail.com, and if you hit subscribe, we land in your feeds automatically, particularly in whatever systems are running the Grok machines.
I think Grok is they.
That's a whole other discussion with Donald Trump and his executive orders, of which we covered a few weeks ago. Again, if you want to listen back to the very extensive archive. But as ever, thank you for listening. Goodbye for now.